Late night in Montana. Samuel's phone buzzed with a choked sob. On the other end was Marcus, his millionaire son, whispering a secret code from childhood. "Dad, the clock. It is running backward." Before Samuel could ask a thing, a glass shattered. The line went dead. A single dad's intuition told him this was no accident. Behind the golden gates of that Seattle mansion, a sinister plot was draining his son's life, one day at a time. Samuel knew he had to act now, because every passing second brings a dark truth closer to a fatal end. Please subscribe and stay with us for the rest of this special story. The wind in Montana does not just blow, it talks. It moans through the gaps in the old barnwood and whispers across the porch of the Miller Ranch. Samuel Miller sat in his favorite wicker chair, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sky met the jagged peaks. In his lap sat a box. It was wrapped in paper so thick and silver it looked like a sheet of industrial metal. The bow was a perfect crimson knot. Isabella had left just an hour ago. She had flown halfway across the country, rented a car, and driven 3 hours from the airport just to hand-deliver this box. A sweater. Made of the finest wool from some island Samuel had never heard of. She stayed for coffee. She laughed. She admired the view. Then she disappeared back down the dirt road in a cloud of dust. Samuel ran his weathered hand over the silver paper. He should have been grateful. He should have been the envy of every old man in the county. But something felt heavy, heavier than the wool in the box. It was the silence where his son's voice used to be. Samuel remembered Marcus at 10 years old, covered in mud and shouting about a frog he had caught. He remembered Marcus at 20, his voice deep with pride as he showed off his first architectural sketches. They used to talk until the sun went down, about the ranch, about the city, about life. But lately the only voice Samuel heard was Isabella's. "How are your joints feeling, Samuel?" she would ask every Sunday morning. The phone would ring at exactly 10 o'clock, always from her number. "I sent those specialty vitamins from the coast. Did they arrive? Please tell me you are taking them." Her voice was like silk, smooth, expensive, and impossible to grip. Every time Samuel tried to turn the conversation toward his son, the silk tightened. "Where is Marcus today, Isabella? I tried calling his cell yesterday." There was always a reason, a perfect shiny reason. "Oh, Samuel, he is in Dubai this week. A massive project. He is barely sleeping, poor thing. He would call, but the time difference is just dreadful." A month later, the story changed. "He is at a silent meditation retreat in the Redwoods. No electronics allowed. His doctor said the stress was becoming too much. He needs the peace, Samuel. You understand, don't you?" Samuel would nod to the empty room. He understood stress. He understood work. But he also understood his son. Marcus was a talker. He was a man who worked through his problems by pacing and describing them to anyone who would listen. The idea of Marcus sitting in silence for 2 weeks felt like a lie. But how do you accuse a saint of lying? Isabella was a saint in the eyes of everyone else. She sent flowers to the neighbors. She donated to the local church in Samuel's name. She was the model daughter-in-law. "You're a lucky man, Sam," his friend Pete would say at the hardware store. "That girl treats you like royalty. Marcus hit the jackpot with her." Samuel would smile. He would agree. But the knot in his stomach only grew tighter. Kindness is a good thing, but too much kindness can be a wall. Samuel started looking at the messages on his phone, short bursts of text from Marcus's number. "Thinking of you, Dad. Glad you liked the gift. Talk soon." No stories, no jokes, no mention of the old ranch dog that Marcus used to obsess over. It was as if Marcus had been replaced by a machine that only knew how to be polite. Then came the videos. Isabella would send them with a little heart emoji. "Look at your hard-working son. He misses you." In the videos, Marcus was always in a dimly lit office or a hotel room. He was hunched over a desk, a blueprint, or a tablet in front of him. He would look up for a brief second. He would wave. "Hey, Dad, just grinding away. Love you." Talk to you when things settle down." The clip would end abruptly, every time. Samuel sat in his darkened living room and played the latest video over and over. He paused it at the 3-second mark. He leaned in until his nose almost touched the screen. There was a shadow near Marcus's ear, a slight flicker in the pixels. It looked like Marcus. It sounded like Marcus, but the eyes were wrong. In every old photo, Marcus's eyes were bright, moving, searching. In these videos, his gaze was fixed, static, as if he were reading a script from a teleprompter he couldn't quite see. Samuel felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. He was a man of the land. He knew when a storm was coming before the clouds even turned gray. He could smell the rain on the wind. He could feel the shift in the pressure. And right now, the pressure was screaming. Why was Isabella so afraid of a simple phone call? Why did she drive 3 hours to deliver a sweater but couldn't hand Marcus the phone for 5 minutes? The lavish gifts started to feel like bribes. The constant check-ins felt like surveillance. She wasn't caring for him. She was managing him. She was keeping him happy so he wouldn't ask the one question that mattered. "Where is my son?" Samuel stood up from his chair. The silver wrapping paper crinkled loudly in the quiet house. He walked to the hallway where the family photos hung. There was Marcus at his wedding. He looked handsome. Isabella looked radiant. But even then in the photo, her hand was gripped tightly around Marcus's arm. Not a gentle touch. A hold. Samuel looked at his own hands. They were scarred and calloused from years of hard work. They were the hands of a man who didn't like being handled. He walked to the kitchen and picked up the bottle of scotch Isabella had brought last month. He poured it down the sink. He didn't want her gifts. He didn't want her vitamins. He went to the closet and pulled out a heavy canvas duffel bag. He began to pack. No more Sunday calls. No more waiting for text messages that didn't sound like his boy. If Marcus was in a fortress of work and retreats, then Samuel was going to find the gate. He didn't call a taxi. He didn't call Isabella to tell her he was coming. He simply walked out to his old truck. The engine turned over with a low, rhythmic growl. He looked back at the ranch one last time. The wind was picking up. The trees were swaying. Isabella thought she was dealing with a lonely old man who could be bought with wool and kind words. She had forgotten one thing. A father's love doesn't need a video to know when his child is in pain. It doesn't need a text message to hear a cry for help. Samuel shifted the truck into gear. The tires crunched on the gravel as he turned toward the main highway. He was going to Seattle, and he wasn't bringing any gifts. The farmhouse was silent. The kind of silence that feels like it has weight. Samuel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. The old wood groaned as the temperature dropped outside. Then the vibration started. His phone danced on the nightstand. The screen glowed, cutting through the darkness like a blade. It was Marcus. Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs. He grabbed the phone. His thumb swiped the screen with a trembling haste. "Marcus, son, is that you?" There was no greeting. There was only the sound of ragged, shallow breathing. It sounded like someone running through a thick fog. "Dad," the voice was thin. It was a ghost of the man Samuel knew. "Dad." The clock. "The clock is running backward." Samuel froze. Ice water seemed to pour down his spine. Years ago, when Marcus was just a boy, they had sat in the woods during a hunting trip. Samuel had told him that if he was ever lost, or if someone dangerous was near, he should use a code. Something that sounded like nonsense to a stranger. Something that meant everything to a father. The clock is running backward. It meant I am in danger. It meant, come find me. "Marcus, tell me where you—" A loud crash interrupted him, the sound of glass shattering against a hard floor. A muffled scuffle followed, and then the line went dead. Samuel sat in the dark, the phone still pressed to his ear. The silence was now terrifying. He dialed back immediately. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped the device. 1 ring, 2 rings. "Hello, Samuel?" It was Isabella. Her voice was as calm as a summer pond. There was no panic. There was no glass breaking. "Isabella, "Where is Marcus? I just spoke to him. He sounded—" "Oh, Samuel?" She interrupted, her tone dripping with gentle sympathy. "I am so sorry. Did he call you? He had a terrible night. He said the code, Isabella. He said the clock. He is having nightmares, Samuel. It is the new anxiety medication the doctor prescribed. It causes vivid, confusing dreams. He woke up shouting nonsense and knocked over a water glass. I just got him back to sleep." Samuel gripped the phone tighter. "Let me speak to him, just for a second." "I can't do that, dear." He finally drifted off. "The doctor said rest is the only way his mind will heal. You wouldn't want to wake him and cause another episode, would you?" She sounded so reasonable. She sounded like a woman caring for a broken man. "Go back to sleep, Samuel. I will have him text you when he wakes up." She hung up. Samuel didn't go back to sleep. He stood up and pulled on his jeans. He grabbed his heavy boots. He didn't think about the distance. He didn't think about his age. He thought about a little boy in the woods who had just signaled that he was lost. He threw a few more things into his bag. He grabbed his keys. He didn't even turn off the kitchen light. The truck roared to life, its headlights cutting through the Montana mist. He turned the wheel toward the west, toward the coast, toward the sun who was running out of time. The highway was a blur of gray pavement and yellow lines. Samuel drove through the night. He drove as the sun began to peek over the mountains behind him. His eyes burned. His back ached. He fueled the truck at a lonely station in Idaho, not even stopping to sit down. He drank black coffee that tasted like burnt beans. He kept his eyes on the road. 15 hours. That is how long it took to reach the outskirts of Seattle. But the city he found was not the one he remembered. He followed the GPS to the coordinates of Marcus's new estate. He turned onto a private road that wound up a steep cliffside. Then he stopped. A gate blocked his path. Not a wooden gate, not a decorative gate. It was a wall of black steel, topped with coils of razor wire that glinted in the overcast light. A sign hung on the fence, "Private property. Armed response." Samuel stepped out of his truck. He looked at the fence. He could hear the faint hum of electricity. This wasn't a home, it was a cage. He walked up to the intercom and pressed the button. He waited. A camera mounted on a high pole whirred. It tilted down, staring at him like a cold glass eye. The gate groaned and began to slide open. Samuel drove through. He passed 2 security guards in the black uniforms. They didn't smile. They didn't wave. They watched his truck with hands hovering near their belts. He pulled up to the front of the mansion. The glass walls looked out over the Pacific Ocean, but the curtains were drawn tight. The front door opened before he could even reach for the knocker. Isabella stood there. She was wearing a cream-colored silk robe. She looked perfectly rested. She looked surprised. "Samuel, what on earth are you doing here?" She stepped out, closing the door slightly behind her. "I came to see my son, Isabella. I'm not waiting for a text message." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were busy scanning the driveway behind him. "You drove all this way. In your condition, Samuel, you should have called. I would have told you it's a bad day." "I'm going in," Samuel said, his voice low and steady. Isabella stepped into his path. She didn't push him. She simply occupied the space. "I'm afraid you can't, Samuel. Marcus had a very difficult morning after that nightmare. The doctor was just here. He gave Marcus a sedative to help him move past the agitation." She placed a hand on Samuel's arm. Her fingers were cold. "He is finally sleeping, a deep healing sleep. If you go in there now, you will only undo the progress we have made. Surely you want what is best for him." Samuel looked past her at the dark windows. He thought about the crash he heard on the phone. He thought about the word sedative. "I'll wait," Samuel said. Isabella's smile flickered for a fraction of a second. "Of course. You must be exhausted. We will get the guest wing ready for you. But please, stay on that side of the house. We must keep the noise down." She led him inside. The air in the house was chilly. It smelled like lavender and bleach. As she walked ahead of him, Samuel noticed a small detail. In the hallway near the entrance to the main living area, there was a fresh scuff mark on the hardwood, and a tiny overlooked shard of glass tucked against the baseboard. Isabella saw him looking. She quickly stepped over it, her robe sweeping the floor. "Rest now, Samuel," she said softly. "Everything is under control." Samuel nodded. He went to the guest room and closed the door. He didn't lie down. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his hands. The clock was running backward, and Samuel was exactly where he needed to be. The guest wing was a masterpiece of cold design. White marble, glass walls. Everything felt sharp. Everything felt empty. Samuel sat on the edge of the bed and listened. He didn't hear the hum of a normal home. He didn't hear the clacking of dishes or the distant sound of a television. The house felt like a tomb wrapped in silk. He stepped into the hallway to find a glass of water. A man in a sharp gray suit was standing near the elevator. He wasn't a butler. He didn't have the soft eyes of a house manager. He had the build of a linebacker and the stare of a shark. "Excuse me," Samuel said, his voice echoing. "Where is Mrs. Gable?" "She has been Marcus's housekeeper for a decade." The man didn't move. He didn't even blink. "Staff changes were made for efficiency, Mr. Miller. Please return to your room for your own safety." Efficiency. The word tasted like copper in Samuel's mouth. He walked toward the dining room for lunch. Every time he turned a corner, a new face appeared. Strangers, dozens of them. They all wore the same gray suits. They all looked through him as if he were made of glass. Isabella was waiting at the table. She was radiant in a pale blue dress. She smiled as she poured him a glass of fresh juice. "I'd like to take a walk in the garden, Isabella," Samuel said. "I need some fresh air. The mountain air in Montana has spoiled me." Isabella set the pitcher down. The sound of the glass hitting the table was like a gavel. "I'm afraid that isn't possible today, Samuel. The new smart security is active. It is a very sophisticated system. Lasers, pressure sensors. It is designed to protect Marcus from intruders." She leaned in, her eyes shimmering with a false concern. "For someone your age, the tech can be dangerous. One wrong step and the sirens will sound. The police would be here in minutes. It would be so stressful for your heart." She patted his hand. Her fingers were cold. Samuel looked at her hand and then at the room. He began to notice them, tiny black lenses. One was tucked into the petal of a silk lily in the center of the table. Another was hidden in the intricate carving of the ceiling molding. They were being watched, recorded, analyzed. This wasn't a house. It was a panopticon. Later that evening, the fog rolled in off the coast. It turned the glass walls into mirrors. Samuel waited until the guards changed their shift. He knew the rhythm of men in uniform. He knew the moment they looked away to check their watches. He slipped out of his room. He didn't use the elevator. He used the service stairs, moving with the silence of a shadow. He reached the master wing. The air here smelled different. Chemicals, lavender, and something metallic. He saw a door at the end of the hall. It was cracked open just a sliver. Samuel pressed his face to the gap. The light inside was a sickly blue. Marcus was there. He was sitting in a motorized wheelchair. The son, Samuel remembered, was a giant of a man who could hike miles without breaking a sweat. This man was a skeleton. His hair was the color of bone. It had turned white in only a matter of months. His skin was translucent, stretched tight over his cheekbones. "Marcus," Samuel whispered so low it was barely a breath. Marcus didn't turn. He didn't flinch. His eyes were wide open, staring at a blank wall with a vacant, glazed expression. It was the look of a man whose soul had been unplugged. Suddenly the door swung open. Isabella was standing there. She didn't look angry. She looked like she was expecting him. "It's time for his special tea, Samuel. Would you like to watch?" She walked to a small cart and picked up a porcelain cup. The liquid inside was dark, opaque. She sat on a stool in front of Marcus. She spoke to him as if he were a toddler. "Open up, darling. This will make the voices go away. This will make everything quiet again." She used a silver spoon to pour the liquid into his mouth. Marcus swallowed mechanically. His throat moved. That was the only sign of life. Isabella turned to Samuel and smiled. It was a theatrical smile. She was playing the part of the devoted wife for the cameras in the corners of the room. "He is so much better now," she whispered. "Before the treatment, he was so confused. Now he is at peace." Samuel looked at his son's lifeless eyes. He didn't see peace. He saw a man buried alive in his own body. He looked at the cup. He looked at the spoon. "He doesn't even know I'm here, does he?" Samuel asked. Isabella wiped a drop of tea from Marcus's chin with a silk cloth. "His mind is far away, Samuel, in a beautiful place. Don't be sad. He is finally safe." Samuel backed away from the room. He walked back through the white hallways. The cameras followed him. The guards watched him. He reached his room and locked the door. His heart was a drum in his chest. He had seen the fortress, he had seen the eyes, and he had seen the poison. The clock was running backward, and if he didn't stop it, Marcus would disappear forever. Samuel looked into the lens of the camera in his own ceiling. He didn't look afraid. He looked like a hunter who had finally spotted his prey. The game was no longer about visits and gifts. It was a war, and the Miller family never lost a war. The sunroom was filled with golden light, but for Samuel Miller, it felt like a spotlight in an interrogation room. He sat in a high-backed chair draped in the expensive cashmere blanket Isabella had given him. He let his head lean to the side. He let a small thread of saliva escape the corner of his mouth. A guard walked past the glass door. The man looked at Samuel with a mixture of pity and boredom. Samuel did not look back. Instead, he let his eyes wander aimlessly, like a man searching for a thought he had lost years ago. "Excuse me, young man," Samuel called out. His voice was thin, cracked. "I seem to have forgotten. Is it breakfast time? I feel quite hungry." The guard checked his watch and smirked. "We just finished lunch, Mr. Miller. Maybe you should take a nap." "Lunch?" Samuel blinked slowly. "Ah, yes, of course. My mind is like an old sieve these days." The guard shook his head and moved on. He didn't notice the way Samuel's eyes sharpened the moment he turned the corner. He didn't see the old soldier calculating the pace of his footsteps. He didn't see the man who was counting the seconds between the camera rotations. To them, he was a fading shadow. To himself, he was a wolf in the fold. Samuel spent the rest of the afternoon wandering. He shuffled down the hallways, pausing to touch the wallpaper or stare at a painting. Each stop was a calculation. He noted the magnetic locks on the library doors. He saw the hidden keypad behind the velvet curtain in the dining room. He realized that the guards were most relaxed during the shift change at twilight. When the moon rose over the Pacific, the house transformed. The glass walls became black mirrors. The blue lights of the security panels flickered like cold stars. Samuel waited. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, his boots off his feet wrapped in thick wool socks. He listened to the silence. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a trap waiting to be sprung. He stepped into the hallway. He moved with the grace of a man who had spent decades stalking predators in the Montana woods. He avoided the center of the marble floor where his weight might cause a vibration. He stayed close to the walls. He timed his movements with the rhythmic hum of the air conditioning. He reached Marcus's home office. The door was a heavy slab of oak, digital, locked. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver tray he had misplaced during dinner. He held it up to the keypad. In the faint light he saw the dull smudges of oily fingerprints. 4 digits. 1, 8, 7, 3. The lock hissed. The door moved an inch. Samuel slipped inside and closed the door behind him. The room smelled of old paper and the metallic scent of electronics. He did not turn on the overhead lights. He used a tiny high-intensity penlight he had kept hidden in his luggage. He scanned the room. His eyes landed on the mantelpiece. There it was, the heirloom clock. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, or at least it used to be. Now the brass hands were pointing in the wrong direction. They were forced, twisted. Samuel picked up the clock and turned it over. The back panel was loose. He pried it open with a steady hand. Inside, jammed deep into the delicate gears, was a small, tightly folded square of paper. He unfolded it. His breath hitched in his throat. It was a list, handwritten in Isabella's elegant flowing script: lithium, diazepam. Next to them was a chemical compound Samuel did not recognize. But next to that compound she had written, 1 drop per hour. Symptoms of confusion will peak. Samuel felt a cold, hard anger settle in his chest. This was the special tea. This was the healing medicine. It was a recipe for a ghost. The lithium would flatten his son's soul. The diazepam would steal his strength. And the secret drop would dissolve his memory. "You monster," Samuel whispered to the empty room. He moved to the desk. He began to rifle through the folders. He found documents that made his blood run cold. Stock transfer contracts, sale of property agreements, all of them were signed by Marcus. But the signatures were not right. They were shaky. The letters were jagged and broken. It was the handwriting of a man who didn't know his own name. It was the handwriting of a prisoner. Samuel realized the depth of the trap. Isabella wasn't just stealing the money. She was building a fortress of lies. If Marcus appeared to have dementia, any protest he made would be seen as a delusion. If he tried to run, he would be brought back for his own safety. It was a mental imprisonment, and the bars were made of medicine and glass. Suddenly the floor outside groaned, the heavy tread of a guard. Samuel clicked off his light. He stood perfectly still in the center of the room. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. The shadow of the guard passed under the door. The footsteps faded into the distance. Samuel knew he couldn't stay long. He needed one more piece of the puzzle. He needed the physical proof of the poison. He crept back toward Marcus's suite. The door was open. The room was bathed in the pale blue glow of the monitoring equipment. Marcus was slumped in his chair, his white hair messy, his mouth hanging open. On the table next to him sat the porcelain cup. It was half full. The dark liquid smelled faintly of almonds and bitter herbs. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic vial. He had taken it from the guest bathroom and washed it thoroughly. With a hand that was as steady as a surgeon's, he tilted the cup. He poured a sample of the tea into the vial. 1 ounce. The evidence of a crime. He capped the vial and slid it deep into his pocket. As he straightened up, he heard the rustle of silk. Isabella was in the doorway. She was silhouetted against the hall light. Her shadow was long and thin. It looked like a spear. "Samuel," she said. Her voice was sweet, but there was a sharp edge underneath. "What are you doing in the dark?" Samuel didn't panic. He let his shoulders slump. He let his eyes go dull. He turned toward her and blinked, looking like a man who had woken up in the middle of a dream. I was looking for the bathroom. Isabella," he murmured. He stumbled slightly, brushing against the wheelchair. "The hallways are so long, I think I got turned around." Isabella walked into the room. She looked at the porcelain cup. She looked at the table. Then she looked at Samuel. For a long moment she didn't speak. The silence was so thick, Samuel could hear the blood rushing in his ears. "You really should be more careful, Samuel," she said finally. She walked to the table and picked up the cup. She poured the remaining tea into a nearby sink. "A man in your state could easily fall. It would be such a tragedy." She took his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Come, let's get you back to bed." She led him out of the room. She didn't see the small bulge in his pocket. She didn't see the fire burning behind his dull eyes. Samuel let her lead him. He let her tuck him back into his bed in the guest wing. He even thanked her for her kindness. But as soon as she closed the door, Samuel sat up. He reached into his pocket and felt the cold plastic of the vial. The soldier had done his job. The evidence was gathered. He looked out at the dark Pacific. The storm was coming. But for the first time in months, Samuel Miller knew exactly which way the wind was blowing. He wasn't a victim. He was The reckoning. The plastic vial felt like a block of ice against Samuel's thigh. He sat in the dark guest room, waiting for the house to breathe. The electronic hum of the mansion was his only companion. He knew the cameras were watching. He knew Isabella was likely staring at a monitor waiting for him to close his eyes. He didn't give her the satisfaction. Under the covers, Samuel used his phone to send a single coded message. It went to Frank. Frank was a man who dealt in the cold truth of blood and bone, an old friend from the force who now ran one of the most respected forensic labs in Seattle. The reply came a minute later. "Bring it to the side gate, now." Samuel moved like a ghost. He didn't use the doors. He used the heavy silk curtains to shield his movement as he slipped through a window he had unlocked during his confused walk earlier. The Pacific fog was his ally. It swallowed his frame as he moved toward the perimeter fence. Frank was waiting in a nondescript sedan. He didn't say hello. He simply took the vial, his eyes meeting Samuel's with a grim understanding. "I will call you when the chemistry speaks, Sam," Frank whispered. The car disappeared into the mist without a sound. Samuel returned to his room before the guards completed their next circuit. He lay on top of the bed, his heart a steady drum. He didn't sleep. He watched the shadows of the clouds crawl across the ceiling. By the time the first gray light of morning touched the windows, the phone vibrated. It was an encrypted file. Samuel opened the report. The words were technical, but the meaning was lethal. High concentrations of neurotoxins, traces of heavy metals designed to suppress the central nervous system, chemicals that mimicked the rapid decay of brain tissue. The conclusion was underlined in red: permanent organ failure and total cognitive collapse within weeks. Samuel felt a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't just a scam, it was an execution. He stood up and smoothed his shirt. He walked into the dining room where Isabella was sipping her morning coffee. She looked radiant in a white silk dress, the picture of elegance and grace. "Isabella," Samuel said, his voice sounding tired and frail. "I've been thinking, Marcus's condition. It's worse than I thought." Isabella set her cup down. Her face softened into a mask of pity. "I know, Samuel. It is heartbreaking." "I have some legal documents back at the ranch," Samuel continued. "Life insurance policies, old trust funds from his mother. I think it's time we bring them here to help with his long-term care." Isabella's eyes sparkled. The predator had spotted a new prize. "That is very wise, Samuel, but you are so tired. I can send someone to get them." "No," Samuel insisted, waving a shaky hand. "The safe is old, only I know the combination. And I need a few days of Montana air. This city, it's too loud for me." Isabella smiled. It was the widest smile he had seen yet. "Of course. Take the truck. Go home for a few days. We will be right here when you return." Samuel left that morning. He drove past the black steel gates. He drove until the mansion was a speck in his rearview mirror. But he didn't head for Montana. He met Frank in a small, quiet diner on the outskirts of the city. With Frank was a man named Miller, no relation, who ran a private investigation firm. They laid out the map of the estate on the table. "She's throwing a gala," Samuel said, his voice no longer frail. "A wedding anniversary celebration. Tomorrow evening, the house will be full of the city's elite. The guards will be distracted by the catering and the guests." "It's a perfect cover for a raid," the investigator noted. "We've already secured the warrants through Frank's medical evidence, but we need to do this publicly. We need to strip her of her mask in front of the people she's trying to impress." Samuel nodded. He looked at the medical report. He thought about Marcus in that wheelchair, staring at nothing. The gala was a sea of black ties and diamond necklaces. Violins played near the infinity pool. Isabella moved through the crowd like a queen, accepting condolences for her poor, sick husband. She had even brought Marcus out. He was tucked in a corner, hidden by floral arrangements, his eyes vacant and lost. The music stopped. Isabella walked onto the small stage in the ballroom. The spotlight caught the sequins on her gown. Thank you all for coming. She began, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. This year has been the hardest of my life. To see the man I love fade away. It is a burden no wife should carry. But my love for Marcus is the only thing that keeps me standing. A few women in the front row dabbed at their eyes. I have dedicated every second to his care, she whispered, and I will stay by his side until his very last breath. The applause was soft and respectful. I'm sure you will, Isabella. The voice came from the back of the room. It was loud. It was steady. It was the voice of a man who had commanded men in the line of fire. The crowd parted. Samuel Miller walked down the center of the ballroom. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing his old Montana work coat and dusty boots. In his hand he held a thick stack of papers. Isabella's face turned the color of ash. Samuel, you should be in Montana. You're confused, dear. Let the guards take you to your room. I'm not confused, Isabella, Samuel said, stepping onto the stage. He held up the medical report so the cameras of the local press invited by Frank could see them. I have the chemistry of your specialty right here. The room went dead silent. Neurotoxins, Samuel said, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Heavy metals. A slow-motion murder disguised as a tragedy. Isabella tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled gasp. This is nonsense. He's an old man. He's lost his mind. Is that right? Samuel turned to the side. Frank, bring him in. The side doors opened. Frank walked in accompanied by 2 uniformed officers and a medical team. They weren't looking at Samuel. They were headed straight for Marcus. Samuel looked Isabella directly in the eyes. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. The clock is running backward, Isabella, Samuel whispered, and your time just ran out. He turned away from her as the first set of handcuffs clicked shut. He didn't look back at the chaos. He walked straight to his son. The crystal chandeliers of the ballroom shivered. Samuel Miller stood on the stage, his silhouette rugged and out of place against the silk curtains. He held the paper as if it were a warrant for an execution. In the back of the room, Frank pressed a button on a small remote. The speakers did not play music this time. They played a recording. It was the sound of the master bedroom, static. Then Isabella's voice, cold and sharp. Still here, Marcus. You always were stubborn. The crowd went cold. A collective gasp rippled through the elite of Seattle. Isabella froze her hand halfway to her throat. She looked at the hidden speakers as if they were ghosts. 1 drop per hour, the recording continued in her voice. Symptoms of confusion will peak, then silence. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Isabella Miller. Samuel said, his voice echoing like thunder. The only thing peaked today is the evidence of your crimes. The heavy glass doors at the back of the hall burst open. Blue and red lights strobed against the white walls. Police officers in tactical gear flooded the room. The guests scrambled back diamonds, catching the frantic light. Isabella tried to run toward the service entrance. 2 officers blocked her path. They did not care about her designer gown. They did not care about her social standing. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the most beautiful music Samuel had ever heard. Isabella screamed. It was not a scream of sorrow. It was the scream of a trapped animal. Her perfect mask was gone. Her face was twisted with a rage that horrified everyone who had once admired her. "Get her out of here," a detective ordered. While the police led her away, Samuel jumped off the stage. He pushed past the floral arrangements. He ignored the cameras. He fell to his knees beside Marcus's wheelchair. Medical technicians were already there. They were checking Marcus's pulse. They were hooking up oxygen. "Is he going to make it?" Samuel asked. His voice was no longer that of a soldier. It was the voice of a father who was terrified. "He is in a deep stupor, sir," the lead medic replied. "But we have the labs from Frank. We know exactly what to flush out of his system. We got him in time." The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and rain. Samuel sat in the back, holding his son's limp hand. It felt like cold wax. But there was a pulse, faint, stubborn, just like Marcus. The days that followed were a long, quiet war. The hospital room was white and sterile, but it felt safer than the mansion ever did. Samuel never left. He slept in a chair that made his old back ache. He ate tasteless food from plastic trays. He spoke to Marcus constantly. The doctor said Marcus might not hear him. Samuel didn't care. "Remember that summer on the lake, Marcus? The one where you tried to catch that big trout with nothing but a net and a prayer. You fell in 3 times, but you didn't quit." Samuel talked until his throat was raw. He told stories about the ranch. He spoke of Marcus's mother. He described the way the Montana sky looked just before a blizzard. On the 5th day, Marcus's eyes moved. On the 7th day, they opened. They weren't glazed anymore. They were tired. They were bloodshot. But they were his. "Dad," Marcus whispered. The word was barely a vibration in the air. Samuel leaned in close, tears finally breaking through his resolve. "I'm here, son. I'm right here." The recovery was slow. The toxins had left deep scars on Marcus's body. But the mind is a resilient thing when it has a reason to fight. The legal battle was swift. Isabella's lawyers couldn't fight the blood work. They couldn't fight the recordings. The glass fortress was dismantled piece by piece as the authorities uncovered the depth of her fraud. Marcus sold the mansion. He sold the luxury cars. He sold the company shares that had almost cost him his life. He didn't want the money. He wanted the wind. A few months later, the Montana ranch felt different. The air was crisp. The mountains were capped with fresh snow. Marcus sat on the porch. He was thinner than before. His hair was still white, but he was standing on his own 2 feet. Samuel came out of the house carrying a wooden box. He set it on the table between them. It was the heirloom clock. The gears were clean. The wood was polished. "Ready?" Samuel asked. Marcus nodded. Together they worked on the delicate inner movements. Their hands moved in a rhythm they had shared for decades. Samuel held the magnifying glass. Marcus adjusted the mainspring. They didn't talk about the mansion. They didn't talk about the poison. They talked about the garden they were going to plant in the spring. Marcus turned the small key. The gears began to hum. A soft mechanical heartbeat returned to the room. Tick, tick, tick. The clock was no longer running backward. The time was right. "It sounds good, Dad," Marcus said. He looked out at the vast, open horizon of Montana. There were no fences here, no cameras, no glass walls. "It sounds like home," Samuel replied. They sat together in the silence, a silence that didn't have weight, a silence that was finally truly at peace. In the end, Samuel and Marcus remind us that the strongest walls are not made of glass or steel, but of the bonds we build with those we love. True wealth is not found in a mansion on a cliff, but in the quiet moments of loyalty and the courage to protect one another. If this journey moved your heart, please share your thoughts and tell us where you are watching from today. We would love to hear from your corner of the world. Please subscribe to join our family here at Touching Tales and click the video on your screen now to discover another story of hope and strength.